there is a ridiculousness and absurdity to our, not just legalism, which says work your way to heaven, but our tribalism that says, and you've got to look like us and dress like us and interpret every little nuance of the Bible just like us and read the same dead guys as us and listen to the same music as us. You better smoke a pipe. You better not smoke a pipe. Whatever your regulations are they keeping you from Jesus? It should make us mad.
What's up, guys? I'm here to tell you this episode is brought to you by Crowd Health. Crowd Health is a new, fast-growing, tech-enabled, well-capitalized, community-powered alternative to traditional health insurance. Founded by Andy Schoonover, a proven founder and entrepreneur with a successful track record, including a $100 million plus exit. By the way, Andy's been on this podcast in the past. Crowd Health uses the power of crowdfunding, member ratings, unlimited choice, and huge cash pay discounts to provide a simple, considerably less expensive solution to managing your medical bills. Crowd Health gives you full agency and sticks with you no matter where you move or what jobs you take on. You've heard of Big Pharma, but you may not know Big Insurance is actually the man behind the curtain. With 12 of the last 15 heads of the FDA taking jobs in Big Pharma and 64% of its funding coming from private industry, don't hold your breath waiting for the government to save the day. It's safe to say our system's broken. It's time to take your well-being into your own hands, and Crowd Health helps you do just that. You'll pay into your individual account monthly, and if you ever want to leave, you'll simply pay a $250 closing fee, and they will return the entire balance in your account to you because it's your account. Because it's crowdfunded, we all have a vested interest in each other's health. They even cover up to $300 a year in routine wellness visits. So far, for every $100 members have paid into their accounts, an average of only $30 has been paid out. So you can expect to see your money grow in your account over time. Take that, Big Insurance. Join today by visiting joincrowdhealth.com and using the promo code KLP to pay only $99 a month for the first 3 months. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code KLP. Joincrowdhealth.com. Get you some. Okay. You good to go?
Yeah, man.
Let's go. Jon Watson, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to have you.
Good
to have you.
Well, no, it's
welcome
good to have
my
you.
podcast, Kent. It's so nice to have you here.
You know what? I bet if you had this podcast, it would be way better.
No, I highly doubt that. It would be far fewer episodes
than
currently exist.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
One of the things that has been interesting working at a church is seeing how busy pastors are. I think pastors tend to be maybe way busier than most might assume. You have prepping for sermons, you have prepping for teaching, you have pastoral care, you have trying to handle the organization, you have a lot. And you started church, when was it?
1 year ago.
I was going to say, yeah, 1 year ago. Mm-hmm. Any surprises on that front so far?
Everything's
I'm sure
a surprise
there has to be
when you're a rookie, right?
Yeah.
There's no way to play ball without playing ball. And so you're not a pastor until you're a pastor. And then everything, in some sense, is you're unable to quantify it or qualify it. So you can describe pastoral ministry, but until you experience the weight of looking people in the eye whose souls you will give an account for before Christ, there's no way to prepare for that. Mm-hmm. So in some sense, everything's been a surprise. But you're right that some people just we don't think about the kind of Monday through Saturday reality of our pastors. So even my mom, who lives about 2.5 hours from us, asked me several months ago, so what do you do? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a pastor. She's like, oh, I know, but so you preach, but like, is that all? Like, no, it's not all. As a church planter, you're the bookkeeper, and you're the treasurer, and you're the administrator, and you're the marketing guy, and you're the website guru, and all those things. But what could be better? Yeah. Right?
Yeah. It's going really well for you guys.
That's what they tell me.
I mean, it seems to be going very well for you guys.
The Lord has been kind to give a growth that is not sensational.
Mm-hmm.
Sensational growth scares me quite a lot. Mm-hmm. But reasonable, steady, healthy growth feels good. It's satisfying.
Well, the one thing that it sounded like you have some boundaries around is protecting your evenings. And one of the things that I've noticed too, I'm not a pastor, but just working at a church is, people tend to have jobs, and then the church stuff, on their end works better like nights and weekends. Right. But the inverse is true, where it's like working there is my job or working there is your job. And so then if you're working there during the day and then doing all the evenings and weekend stuff, then it's just all the time. Right. And you blocked out a night a week or something like that that's helping you have some boundaries around that?
Yeah, what we've done for the last year is Fridays are family day, and we don't see people. We'll go to Costco, right, because hot dogs. Yeah. But there's no social, because as a pastor, your ministry and your social life, the lines are very, very blurred. So when does hanging out with your friends who are also in your church become work? And so to protect that family rest, we blocked off a day where it's just the family. That was Fridays. Saturdays, we're open to social engagements, but it's no work meetings, no phone calls, that sort of thing. Today is the first day that my wife and I agreed to shift that to Saturdays and Mondays. So I'll let you know in a couple months how that's.
Oh, so you're shifting away from Friday being the family day to Saturday and Monday.
Right.
The downside on Saturday is going to be it's the day before you preach. That's going to be in your mind a little bit.
Yes.
The upside to Monday is it's kind of like the big day's over, and then you have that. You can really relax then probably Sunday night and into Monday.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that yet. I think what tends to happen on Mondays is kind of a paradoxical reality where on the one hand, I'm jazzed from Sunday, right? I mean, the feeling where you go to church and the Lord wakes something up in you and you're just like, I've got energy to spend for the kingdom, right? So as a pastor, I want to go, I get that as well. And I want to go expend that energy and start sending emails and writing the next sermon and doing all these things. And on the other hand, I'm never more drained than on a Monday. I'm just so tired, soul weariness, So I'm going to have to die to the excitement and the desire to get after it and live in the rest of Christ on a Monday. And I'm seeing that as a holy challenge.
Yeah. So the get after it feeling, is that Sunday afternoon or Monday or both?
I think it's both, yeah. The Sunday afternoon feeling bleeds into the Monday for me. But I'm just a rookie. We'll see how this goes in the next few months.
Well, this is entirely different because I don't preach or anything like that. Sunday is still like a bit of work day, although it doesn't really feel that way. But I think this has nothing to do with like working in a church. But there is something about like going to church on Sunday mornings, where Sunday afternoons, often I will I just get this little itch to do something creative,
Yeah.
Or sometimes read or whatever. But I feel like energy on a Sunday afternoon. I don't really want to care to be like around people all afternoon, but anyhow, thank you for your time. I want to make good use of it because I know if you got home early, you wouldn't probably complain. Did not have this on the radar when we scheduled this. By the way, it is probably 87 degrees in my little garage right now, so I apologize for that. It's very warm in here. Hey, thankfully, it's summer, basically. I think we might have skipped spring, but spring is well on its way here in Tennessee, and it is like 87 degrees, late April, which is fantastic. I couldn't be happier.
It's perfect.
But my studio is in my garage, and it's stinking hot in here. So that's what's happening. But I'll get an AC unit at some point because there's no way we're going to make it through the summer. Anyhow, I did not have this in mind when I scheduled this conversation with you because there were some things I wanted to talk about. But then in the meantime, this past Sunday, Tom Cox preached at Emmanuel, our church, Emmanuel Church, Nashville. People can Google it and go check it out. TJ was out of town, and Tom Cox preached. Did you know this, by the way?
I heard that. He's one of my board of directors.
Oh, cool.
Well, he's not the board. He is a director on the board. And Tuesday night we had a meeting, and I heard that he preached. So
yes,
it's on my list to go find that.
I mean, I think Tom and Amy Cox were founding members of Emmanuel, I think
that's right.
and he's been a long time elder. And this is the first time that we've been attending, which was late 2016, that he preached. And it was really amazing. I suggest people check it out if they want to. Anyhow, he preached on Ephesians 4:17 to 24, and I hit you up, I think it was just today, via text on, do you know anything about the culture of the Gentiles that this scripture passage is referencing? Because we read through the scripture that is going to be preached every week in our service planning meeting.
Yeah.
And so the Tuesday before Tom preached this passage, we were reading through the passage, the staff was, and I just found myself like wanting to know more. Verse 17, it's talking about, no longer walk as the Gentiles do. And I'm like, how do the Gentiles walk? I just wanted to know more about their culture and what life was like for them. Like, kind of picture what was going on in that day, because I do feel like I don't really know.
Yeah.
And so I asked you, this was very last minute, if you had any idea about some of those things, and if you'd be interested or up to share some of those. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Sure.
Maybe it might make sense just to read Ephesians 4:17 to 24 is kind of the little chunk there, right?
Yep. To 17 to 24, and then there's
also
pivot from 25 to 32.
Yeah.
Which is the outworking of like what Paul's really getting at.
Yeah. Do you think it makes sense to read the whole thing right now, or shall we read half of it and then the other half in a second?
Let's start with 17 to 24.
Okay. Yeah. All right. If you don't mind, go ahead and read it, and then let's dig in on that.
In the Greek, right?
Please.
Now this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to their hardness of heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. But that is not the way you learned Christ, assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness.
Two things. The one thing that Sam Albury mentioned in that read through in the service planning meeting was he kind of noted that they were ignorant because of the hardness of their heart. Their hearts weren't hard because they were ignorant.
Yeah.
That's interesting. There's almost a darkness to that, and a dignity at the same time, because it's not like their hearts were hardened because they were so dumb, but rather that they were ignorant because their hearts were hardened. And then I'll just lay all my cards on the table, because as I was reading through this, you tell me, but I would assume the highest and best purpose of a passage like this is to apply it to our own hearts. We have all sinned. We have all, to some level, done all of these things listed in here. And for a believer in Christ, if you have that righteousness through the blood of Jesus, there's going to be a before and an after in your life. And that's probably the highest and best use of reading this passage, is applying it that way. I was having a hard time not noticing some similarities between this passage and what's happening in our current culture.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to know more about, was their culture of the day. I mean, when you read through this, like, if you had told me, hey, this was written last year for modern day American culture, I wouldn't have been shocked. And so tell us about what life was like back then.
Well, as a non-first century expert, but, someone who's studied a bit on it, I can tell you that Ephesus was a very important city in that part of the world. It was a port city, so it's on the water. And, if you read Plato's The Republic, which is worth a read, you'll start to see that port cities become places that are a convergence of ideas. And so because, ships are coming in from all over the known world into port cities. And so it's the nexus point where ideas are meeting and conversing together. And so port cities tend to be politically more liberal. You can see that today where the metropolis is the modern port city, right? When now we don't need water to connect disconnected peoples. We need airports. And we need skyscrapers.
Except a lot of cities still are on rivers, if you think about it.
It's very true.
It's like almost
That's
all
right.
of them that I'm aware of.
Right. Because it's really airfare and the train that made the difference for us not needing water for those things. And so if you look at, say, Nashville, Tennessee, is it politically more liberal or conservative? Well, it's more conservative than Seattle. It's more liberal than, Springfield, Missouri, right? The more rural you get, the more kind of removed and smaller you get, the fewer ideas you have to bring to the table from different parts of the world. So Ephesus is a place that's gathering up in its proverbial arms all of these ideas and religions and philosophies and teachings from all over the known world, particularly the Roman Empire. And that is going to have a pretty major influence on them.
And there's trade. So that's like a ship port, you said.
Mm-hmm.
So there's trade coming in from just wherever.
Yeah.
All over.
Yeah. Basically everything Roman. And then the things on the fringe of Roman that are probably going to be Roman soon, right? It was so important that they used to dredge the, I don't know if it wasn't a canal so much, but the port didn't have strong enough currents, from what I was reading, to wash away kind of the sludge that just accumulates on like river mouths. And so they would have to manually dredge it just to keep boats able to come into this place.
Wow.
And they had to do that incredible feat of work for 2,000 years ago and the equipment they had, because their culture, their identity, their economic prosperity relied on the port, relied on the convergence of ideas. And so right away, if it strikes you as modern and relevant and contextually appropriate to today, that's because we live in a port city, so to speak, right? And the internet is the new train and plane in that it makes the convergence of ideas possible and almost intrusively present everywhere. Mm-hmm. There's nowhere you can go that you're not getting bombarded with this. Now, the difference is if the internet is like a port or an airport, we're like TSA, that we get to block out people that don't think like we want them to think.
Sure.
That's not fair to the TSA. For the record, thank you for all of your service.
Yes.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right? That we get to be more exclusive about what kind of content we receive in.
Yeah.
Or we think that we have that kind of autonomy. Mm-hmm. So that was a big part of life in Ephesus. It was a capital in the Roman Empire. It was a big deal. There were a lot of gods worshipped, a lot of paganism, a lot of syncretism where you kind of blend religious ideas together and just pretend that their mutual exclusivities don't matter, and you just kind of make it all work. You fit it all together. So you get to be in the cult of Artemis, and you get to be in the cult of Zeus, and you get to be in the cult of whatever your ancestral religion is. You just add them all onto your life. And if this is sounding like New Age spirituality, I don't think that's an accident. There's something in our current moment where it's very in vogue, I think, to take the best from Buddhism and the best from Islam and the best from Christianity, and you blend these things together into this sort of spiritual Whole30 diet that suits your needs, that you think you're going to do really well on. And I think that that's remarkably dangerous because each of those have exclusive claims that can't stand with the other.
Yes. Yep. And what time period was this written? Do we know? Can you place this in history?
Someone can.
Okay.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
I know that most of Paul's letters were written from Ephesus. He spent a lot of time there. He did a lot of preaching and a lot of writing from Ephesus.
And this would have been, please pardon my ignorance here, but this would have been after Jesus had died and rose again, after Jesus.
Yeah, we're probably talking in the 20 to 40 years after the resurrection.
Okay.
AD 62.
AD 62. Okay.
That's the one.
So Paul's writing this. Paul wrote this, right?
Yep.
He's writing this 62 years after Christ.
It'll be about 30 years after the resurrection.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's almost a full kind of Jewish generation of 40 years.
Okay. All right.
A young man's lifetime. So it's a port city. It's syncretistic. A lot of religions happening. Artemis is the main attraction, though, right? The cult of Artemis of the Ephesians. A big monument to Artemis, huge temple to Artemis. The city revolved around Artemis in a particular way. So Artemis was, if I remember right, the Greeks called her Artemis. The Romans called her Diana. She was a fertility goddess. And fertility goddesses often got a kind of a brunt of the worship because they can get you what you really want, which is essentially like offspring in the ancient world is wealth. Offspring are wealth. They are security. They are, happiness. They are social status. So fertility, gods and goddesses mattered a lot. And so you have this Artemis who is kind of the adopted matron of this city. So I think it's Acts 19. Paul goes to Ephesus, starts preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ and converting people who then turn from Artemis to Jesus, right? And because of the nature of this particular capital, their economy was tied up in their religion. And anytime you get money involved in a religion, the religion stops being about the religion and starts being about the money, right? Like Jesus talks about money as a really good thing to use to further the kingdom and a really bad thing to serve as a master. So it's kind of like when modern day institutions just get too big to fail. And now we have to start protecting the institution rather than the institution serving the people, which is what they're meant to do. So the institution of the religion of Artemis gets too big to fail. Paul challenges puts cracks in the foundation of it by preaching the gospel. People start to turn away, and the silversmiths in Ephesus begin to riot because their trade, their economy is making trinkets and idols of Artemis. So if people start following Jesus, they stop buying these trinkets, and the whole city's economy will crumble. That's their fear.
Wow.
It's a remarkably prescient and modern idea.
Yeah, the idea of religion being tied in with the economy is very interesting, and it's also hard not to think about the current day present situation. Yeah, absolutely. That's your water, bro. Yep. And here's more if you need more.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. Yeah, I think I am extrapolating far too much here, but some of the current cultural influences feels like that it's almost like a religion of sorts, and it's like going into the corporations.
It is a religion.
It is a religion.
Yes.
Okay.
I would say so.
Yeah.
We have gods that we worship. We have religious duties that we do and things that we say and ceremonies that we enact that signify that we are worshiping this God. I mean, we're certainly spiritualizing the language, but the idea of idolatry permeates our modern age. We just don't bow down to actual little wood and stone and metal objects. But there are still things that we created, things that we center our lives around that then control us and become so big in our hearts that we can't let them fail. And now we have to serve them.
So you raised an interesting point about us being in Nashville. That was not something that was on my mind when I was thinking about this. And so it's possible that, depends even where you're at in this particular country, someone may read through this and maybe not have some of the same thoughts or questions that I was having.
Mm-hmm.
But also, they may, because a lot of this I feel like has hit the mainstream news, the mainstream media. I don't think it. I think people from most parts of the country are fairly. If we told them like what was going on in Nashville, a place where culture ideas are spread and shared and so forth, I don't think it would be a shock to most people, right? They may not be experiencing it maybe in their small town and wherever that may be, Montana, but they're probably aware of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so when he says you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do, is he referring to, who's he referring to by the Gentiles there? Just people that are not Jews or are not Christians? Who's he referencing there?
Yeah, so the question is, does he mean all Gentiles, or does he mean Gentiles who don't follow Jesus? And I think, to me, when I read Ephesians 4 and the rest of Ephesians, first of all, Ephesians is about Jew and Gentile. Like, that's kind of the main topic on the table for conversation here. So it permeates the whole letter. And when he uses the phrase Gentile, or the word Gentile here, it doesn't seem to fit with Gentile Christians. He's not asking them to get more Jewish in their Christianity. He's asking them to get less pagan. So I think what he means are by Gentiles, and the word in Greek is it's peoples, ethne. It's just peoples. It's peoples of the world who aren't belonging to God's family. So he's saying, look, there's a people. There are lots of peoples who don't belong to Jesus, and then there's a people that do. Don't live like you don't belong to Jesus. Mm-hmm. That's the heartbeat of what he's saying here, and he gets at that with the clothing language of put off the old self and put on the new self, which we can talk about at some point, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and he says, in the futility of their minds, that is very scary to me.
Mm-hmm. Why is that scary to you?
Well, that seems to me like one of the worst positions you could be in as a human. Mm. Like, you have these thoughts, they're futile. I mean, if you have any color on the word futile or the futility there of their mind, but I'm thinking it means it's worthless. So like, they have these thoughts, they have these ways of being, this worldview, their ways of thinking doesn't matter, completely useless, futile. Yeah. Is that an accurate way of, because if that is accurate, that's what's scary to me, is like that seems to be one of the scariest positions to be in as a human, because it's just worthless.
Yeah.
But you didn't think it was worthless, but it actually is worthless.
Right.
Completely meaningless. Is that an accurate way to?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting word. It's good that you picked up on that. There's a lot of debate about what it means. But if you go and look up where that Greek word is used in the New Testament, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint, and in other kind of Greek classic literature. So Philo of Alexandria was a Jewish philosopher who tried to reconcile Greek Stoicism and Plato's philosophy with the Mosaic Law and the Hebrew Bible. He was a contemporary of Jesus, but lived in Egypt, and their paths never crossed as far as we know. But Philo uses this word a couple different times that I could find. And in one of them, he uses the word in context of quoting Moses from the book of Exodus. And he's saying, if you hear the words of God, the commands of God, and don't do something about it, it's futility. Mm-hmm. So that kind of adds to our understanding of how is this word futility used in our minds. And then if you read the book of Ecclesiastes, it starts with this word, right? Vanity, vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. It's a key word, vanity or futility being the same Greek word in the Septuagint. That word is a key word that runs throughout Ecclesiastes. And I think it's a fascinating thought experiment. If you were to replace that word, vanity, or If you're reading the NIV, it's meaningless. If you were to replace it with X, right? So you don't know what word is there. And then you read the book of Ecclesiastes and you start to make notes about what could fit in the place of X. What word? Vanity, vanity, says the X, says the preacher. Everything is X. I tried to accumulate money to fill the void in my heart and be happy, but it was X. And so I got lots of servants, and I built palaces and gardens, and I had a zoo, and it was all X. So I tried sex and had, women in my palace, and it was X, etc. By the end of the book, you don't get the sense, when I ran the thought experiment, that it's entirely meaningless or worthless. But, the literal word in Hebrew of hevel, which this translates, is smoke or vapor. Mm. So, you light your cigarette, you puff smoke out, and there is something to it. And you're tasting something, and I'm smelling something, and it does exist, and it has a point and a purpose and everything. But in 5 minutes, where's the smoke?
Gone.
It's gone. And you can't grab it. You can't get your hands around it. You can't put it in your pocket and enjoy it later. It's something very temporal and without an end. And that endlessness, and I don't mean eternality, I mean something without a point at the end of it, something that it culminates in. I think that might be what Paul is getting at here.
Uh-huh.
So imagine if your mind orders your life and you think your way through the world, right, which is one way of living. Some feel their way through the world. But if your mind orders your life, which they did, it was philosophy that drove their culture, and your thinking has no culmination to it, it doesn't end in anything, then what is the point? Mm-hmm. And so I start to, I hesitate to just give a simple definition of what that phrase, futility of the minds, means, but you start to flesh out this picture of endless debates and flowery language and lots of blogs and books and podcasts and movies about concepts that end in nothing. Uh-huh. And it's gone. Huh. And it made no footprint in this world. And your soul, it doesn't matter at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something that that was a really long
that makes sense.
Diatribe on a single word.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. That's what I'm after, man. Why do you think I had you on here?
Don't ask about any other words. You just happened to ask about the one that I've researched.
Yeah. Now I say and testify in the Lord that you must no longer walk as the peoples do in the futility of their minds. So if that is sort of like an endlessness, now you said you weren't necessarily talking to eternality, but if hell is among other possible things, if it is separation from God eternally, mm-hmm. could this be referencing that? Like they served a purpose while they were here. They interacted with people. They had some kids. They maybe increased their knowledge. They progressed in certain ways in society. Like they were still used while they were here.
Yeah.
But then when they died, they basically disappeared forever.
Yeah.
Is that how you think about hell? And is that possibly what this could be getting at here?
You're not paying me enough for this conversation.
Well, yeah, I'm not paying you all.
That's really astute. It's a really astute question and comment, Kent. I think what you're getting at is that everything that we've just talked about in futility of their minds, that phrase, is teleological, right? So that word comes from telos, which is this Greek word for the end or the goal or the aim of a thing.
Okay.
Right? So if you're shooting a bow, the telos is the target, in a sense. It's a simplification, but it works. So to be teleological means to function with an end and a purpose in mind. Frankly, teleological living is what we crave. We want to live a life full of purpose and meaning so that even if we just stop existing at the end of it, Our last thought can be, at least it mattered to my children. At least it mattered to my community. At least I made a difference, right? Like everyone wants that at the very least, right? God gives us the best teleological framework for living that there possibly could be, and that everything we do, the Lord says your labor is not in vain. Everything we do here in Christ echoes into eternity, which is incredible. So you're asking about eternity and about hell. Verse 18 says that they are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God. So it doesn't say alienated from God. And I think that's important. Of course, in some sense, relationally, they are alienated from God, right? If you reject God, then you're not in sort of a covenant relationship, a loving friendship with God like we would want to be. But they're alienated from the Zoe of God, the life itself of God. So think about Jesus on the cross. It's my position. He says on the thing that will go on YouTube and live forever. It's my position that Jesus did not spend 3 days in hell, because he said to the thief, today you'll be with me in paradise. Yep. It's my position that, especially in Matthew, you see it clearly. It says darkness descended on the land from this hour to this hour. It was 3 hours of utter darkness. Now, if you look at the rest of Matthew's gospel, the darkness, when Jesus uses this phrase, utter darkness, it talks about, in parables and in true teaching, without the veil of a story, the reality of someone who's rejected God being cast away from him forever. And there he says constantly, there is much weeping and gnashing of teeth in the utter darkness. Jesus enters into 3 hours of utter darkness, and I think that was 3 hours of in eternity of anguish, squeezed into a 3-hour package in his soul.
3 hour or 3 day?
3 hours on the cross while alive. I believe Jesus experienced hell alive in his mortal body, in his soul.
Dang, man.
Yeah. And when he died, was received to the bosom of Abraham and the Father. I think that's what happened. Reformed bros, please don't come at me.
You think that Jesus experienced an eternity of darkness during the 3 hours on the cross?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he shouts out, it's finished. Not it's about to begin. It'll be finished 3 days later. I do. And to me, that
I don't usually cry on the podcast, bro. I don't know why. That is intense.
Yeah.
That's intense.
It is intense. Yeah. And I guess my point in bringing that up is Jesus in that moment was not alienated from God's presence. He was alienated from God's life. Like in John 15, 1 through 11, he says, abide in me. I am the vine. You're the branches. And any branch that doesn't abide in me is going to get cut off by the Father, by the vine dresser, and thrown into the fire and burned. So he's making this metaphor that, I'm sure you have a vine or a tree somewhere in your yard with dead limbs still attached to the tree. They're not drawing their life from the vine. Yep. So they're dead. Yep. And in some sense, Jesus, in our place, was in the presence of the Father and stopped drawing his life from the Father so that he would be a sinner in the hands of an angry God on our behalf. No, he wouldn't be a sinner. He would be sin. Like 1 Corinthians says, he who knew no sin became sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. He embodied evil right there in God's presence so that we could embody God's righteousness by his grace. So I think that phrase, alienated from the life of God, is pretty important. And I think when it's talking about the futility of the minds of the people who don't live like God is truth, who don't live like God is the one around whom to orient their lives, like God's glory is the telos, the purpose, the point, the target of all of existence. If that's not our life, we will be alienated from the life of God. And we've already seen a picture of what that looks like. And we get the word excruciating from the word crucifixion. Like our very concept of insufferable pain comes from Christ because he experienced that for us.
So if that's true, it's like there was like a valve or something where there was like a direction that flipped, like God or Jesus Christ experienced separating himself from the life of God for those 3 hours or whatever time period it was, so that it could be funneled to us in a way.
That's right.
Could that be?
Yeah.
One of the things Tom said on Sunday, which I recommend. We have two services, 9 and 10:45. And after the first service, Mariana was home with the kids because we had two sick kids. And I texted her and I'm like, you going to watch the second service? And she was going to, but I was like, yeah, you're not going to want to miss this one. So I do suggest people could just Google or go on YouTube and just Google Tom Cox, Emmanuel Nashville, and they'd find the sermon.
COX, right?
Yep, COX. And but one of the things he said is that we have ears to... I don't know why I'm crying on this podcast, dude. Something's wrong. But we have ears to hear the gospel. Like that's the purpose of our ears.
Yes.
Like that's the reason we have ears.
Yes.
I think maybe part of it that makes it so like why I'm feeling the intensity of it right now is, because it's not how I was thinking, it's not how I tend to think. I don't go through the day waking up thinking, that I have ears so that I can hear the gospel. But also part of it is, so I feel like a sort of like a strong, draw back to like, this is good news, like this is like the highest and best use. This makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like if what we're saying about God is true or real, and he is that central to reality, to creation, to us, and this is how our lives can orient to that. And this is how love and God's purpose can be spread in the world. That makes sense to me. Like, yes, that would be the reason we have ears. It is that central. It is that critical. It is that important. But also it's like, man, when you think of, there's a lot of ears out there that, well, they're not hearing the gospel, and that's the reason they have them, but they're not hearing it sad is a cheap word. It's like, I don't know. What is it like? It's like a shame. Like, it's like yeah. So the futility of their minds, they are darkened in their understanding.
I'm just like letting what you said soak in. That's really, yeah.
Yeah.
Psalm 115 says, the nations, the Gentiles, make idols of wood and silver and stone, and having ears they do not hear, and eyes they do not see, and mouths they do not speak. And those who make them become like them. And there's a reality that what you worship is what you are moving toward and becoming like. Right? The thing that you bow down to, you're just going to start to image. And so here you've got Paul saying, you're going to bow to Artemis. There's futility in your mind. The end is nothing but separation from the life of God, who is life. Like he is the living God. He is existence in a sense. I mean, his name is I am that I am. He is the existing one. That's the end of that. Bowing to idols, you become like idols. 1 Corinthians 3:18 says, when we all beholding the glory of the Lord with unveiled face, are being transformed from one degree of glory into another, transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. So if we worship idols, we become like them. Our ears that were made to hear the good news and glorify God stop working. And our eyes stop seeing. And our mouths stop speaking his praise. That's why he says here that it's not about their ignorance. It's about the hardness of their hearts that led to their ignorance, that led to their futility, right? The flip side image of that, though, it's the Westminster Confession says it in question 1, larger catechism or shorter catechism. What is the chief end of man? It's to glorify God and enjoy him forever. That's what we're made for. That's our telos, our end. And so Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 3, 2 Corinthians 3, I think it's 2 Corinthians 3 and 3:18, that our end is to gaze on the glory of God in the gospel, and by gazing at his glory, become more like him from one degree of glory to another. It's how we become Christ-like as we take long looks at Jesus in the gospel. I think Tony Shepard calls that the Boone sauce. I don't know why. You'll have to ask him.
Boone or Boone? Boone sauce.
Yeah, you just have to ask him next time.
I will ask. I've not heard that term before.
So, do you have the Boone sauce?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll ask him.
But yeah, I think that idea is fundamental to Paul's theology. It's fundamental to John's theology. When we see him, we will become like him, for we will see him as he is in 1 John 3. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, Paul is the guy who on the road to Damascus to persecute the church saw Jesus. And what was his conversion moment? When did he stop become a Christian persecuting Jew and start becoming a Jewish Christian who loves Jesus? There was no argument. There was no persuasive teaching, right? All he did was see Jesus. That was all it took. There's something about, and it was in his Jesus not just showing up like a gardener, like he did to Mary after his resurrection, but Jesus in such dazzling glory that it blinded Saul and everyone with him. Seeing Jesus in his glory makes us more like Jesus. It's just the way this works. But if we're blind because we refuse to look, we're going to get more like the deaf, mute, blind idols that we end up serving.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things I feel right now is that how easy it is for me to not gaze at Christ like I could. I mean, you could say like I should. Fine. Maybe that's an okay word, but that's sort of like a shaming little thing. But it's just like I could, I could. And it's like it's shocking to me how quickly I can drift in my attention and desires away from the thing that is most central to life.
Yes.
But I think what I was feeling, when I was thinking about these people with ears that are made to hear the gospel, but they can't hear it or they don't hear it, is it's maybe consequence. Like there's such a consequence to that. I mean, if what we're saying is true, there's nothing more consequential. And the other thing that I'm feeling too is like, this is the thing that I think is a really, it's a damn shame when people add a bunch of bullshit to it.
Yes, that's right.
Because you're clouding it.
Yes.
Like you're hiding it.
Yeah.
You're adding to it. Like you're putting barriers to the very thing that's most consequential in life. That is. And so when you think about it that way, it's actually not surprising now, is it, that some of the words that Jesus had to say for the Pharisees, because they did some of that, didn't they? They added, they clouded it.
Yeah. Very much so. It didn't stop with the Pharisees though. Right. Galatians is a whole book written from Paul to a church who had received people that were adding to the gospel, clouding it, making it harder to get at. And I think it's Galatians 3 that begins in English. I'll never forget. This was 10 years ago at a little church in Washington. We had a guest preacher, and he had this very remarkable voice, very preacherly voice, and was reading this and said, "Oh, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" And that his pronunciation of, Galatians has become a meme in my household for many years since. But there's something where we read that and think, ha ha ha, oh foolish Galatians. Paul's screaming at him. He's grabbing them by the shirt collar and shaking them like, you idiots. How could you let this happen? How could you let anything come between you and the free offer of salvation in Christ? Like, you've been freed from 613 laws in the Torah, and you want to add some back? What are you smoking? There is a ridiculousness and absurdity to our, not just legalism, which says work your way to heaven, but our tribalism that says, and you've got to look like us and dress like us and interpret every little nuance of the Bible just like us and read the same dead guys as us and listen to the same music as us. You better smoke a pipe. You better not smoke a pipe. Whatever your regulations are they keeping you from Jesus? It should make us mad.
That's a strong point about the legalism, but then also the tribalism, because what you're explaining, actually, the tribalism is the legalism. It's just cloaked as tribalism.
Yes,
and dang,
right. Yeah,
that's a more sneaky one. That I wasn't thinking about, but that's actually, I think that's a really strong point. I could see it depending on someone's context. Like, I can envision a context where the straight up legalism, do this, do that, laws that they're adding back into it is maybe more prevalent. But I kind of feel like in our context, maybe the tribalism might be the more ready temptation.
Yes.
That's a strong point.
Yeah. It's a subtle dagger. There's a story in J.I. Packer's book, Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God, which is well worth reading for anybody. Right off in chapter 1, he says, Charles Simeon, who's this great old preacher from the 1700s, he was a Calvinist preacher, so big on sovereignty and election and, all these kind of Calvinist doctrines. He meets John Wesley, who's a great preacher of the First Awakening, an Arminian, so anti-Calvinist in some sense. They are the two opposing camps of the Protestant church, if I can be simplistic. Simeon meets Wesley, and Simeon says, now before we use the daggers in our hands, right, let me just ask a few questions, like, who saved you? And Wesley's like, well, God saved me. Right? And Simeon says, well, okay, so assuming God saved you, how do you now continue in your salvation? And Wesley said, is God from start to finish? And after a few more questions like that, Simeon says, I think we should sheathe our daggers, because this is my whole Calvinism. It's just resting on the goodness of God, the sovereignty of God, the providence of God, the power of God, and saying, I'm a worm. I've got nothing to offer you, God. That is the epitome of not just Calvinism, but of Christianity. It's actually the heart of Arminianism too.
Yeah.
And if we can understand that, these two big kind of almost pretend camps, they're caricatures now of Calvin and Arminius, right? If we can understand that and put away our swords, we might get some real good done in this world with Jesus.
Yeah, I love that, dude. I totally agree. Okay, so they're alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. And that ignorance is there because of the hardness of their heart. They've become calloused. They've given themselves up to sensuality. They're greedy. This is an interesting phrase. They're greedy to practice every kind of impurity.
Yeah.
Callous, giving themselves up to sensuality, which is interesting. I want to hear a little bit about that, because that's you could give yourself up to a lot of things, but they're giving themselves up to sensuality. But greedy to practice every kind of impurity. It's almost like there's a... There's a
loud in the microphone. Sorry.
What's that? Oh, go for it.
Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted a poignant
Oh,
moment.
you said you weren't going to bring a pipe because you
didn't
didn't
say I wasn't gonna.
Oh.
I just said,
You said the pipe wasn't going to work on the podcast, which I didn't push back on or ask you about, because I didn't understand why the pipe wouldn't work on the podcast.
What I said was cigars have a longer burn life. That's what I meant.
Sure, yeah, but also you know how to smoke that thing well. Yeah. There's one right here. Right on.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. But yeah, it's just interesting that being like greedy to practice every kind of impurity. It's almost like there's a there's like somehow there's a drive to, it's not like something you just sort of drip into or drift off to or happen into, but there's like a push towards the practicing every kind of impurity. I guess that would be probably what the nature of sin results in, isn't it?
Yeah, think about it generationally. Someone's parents, you're raised in a house that's like, don't drink alcohol. It's the devil. Don't listen to music with drums. I don't know, whatever the thing is, like don't wear pants if you're a woman, like whatever your thing is that you're not allowed to do. The kind of stereotypical response of the next generation is to go out and do that to an extreme degree.
Yes.
Says the guy smoking a pipe. And that's just human nature. Human nature is, you can't tell me what to do. I'm a free man, right? I'm going to go do what I want to do, and I have the self-control to keep that in bounds or whatever. And it can very easily end up becoming a greed of like, tell me what else was off limits that I can have. Yeah. I just feel that very personally, and I see that in my generation growing up right now. And this moment that we're in America doesn't, I mean, it shocks me, but it doesn't surprise me. Because I'm like, well, yeah, I kind of get it. Like there, but for the grace of God. And I'm wrestling with my own versions of that, but that's kind of what human nature does. And there was a pastor in the 4th century named John Chrysostom. John the golden-mouthed, they called him. That's what Chrysostom means in Greek. I think it's Greek. Yeah, it's Greek. He was a pastor in Antioch in modern-day Turkey. And yeah, he was a phenomenal preacher. We've got a ton of his sermons still. They're really, really interesting. If you ever look them up, they're usually online for free. Not recordings, because, it was prior to... Yeah. That was a joke.
But there's like
Sorry.
Transcripts.
Yeah,
I'm tracking.
Transcripts. So anyway, Chrysostom wrote on this passage, wrote a sermon and preached it on verse 17 specifically. And he talked about the culture. Now, I don't know if he was talking about 1st century Ephesian culture or 4th century culture for his audience. That's not a huge span of time. So I'm going to read a little bit of license into that of like, maybe it's not that different, right? Maybe we don't change as much as we think we do from one kind of century to the next. But what he said was interesting to me. He said basically, look, you're greedy for gods that the tales of the gods coming down and fornicating and, cheating on their spouses with humans. You look at that and go, truth. The gods are like us. We can worship these gods. And then we tell you of a God who's raised from the dead and is nothing but purity, cleanliness, and goodness. And you said, that's a fable. There's a greed in that for everything that's not right. And then he says, you look around with your eyes at this world and you look up at the sun and you go, oh, look, this thing is glorious and bright. And because of the sun, plants and seeds can thrive and are nourished. So we should worship this thing that's so powerful and good. And he says, well, the sun is dependent on other things. It's not an ultimate good. It's a secondary good. And of course, he doesn't have the sort of modern science that we have, so he doesn't know what the sun actually is. But even he's like, look, the sun can be obscured by clouds. A cloud, though not as powerful as the sun, can still master it for a time. So why are you worshiping that thing? And he says, the sun nourishes plants and seeds. Fine. So does dung. Why don't you worship dung? Right? So he starts poking holes at their logic of all the things that they want to worship in these pagan cultures. And he says, you worship fire. Okay. Fire knows neither friend nor foe. You contain fire. And if you stop putting boundaries around the fire, it will consume everything, regardless of the sacrifices you offer at its foot. So that's not worthy of your worship either. There's this greed to take everything untrue, everything created, and make it the creator, everything good and make it ultimate good. And I mean, the rest, the prophets in the Old Testament just call it idolatry. And we do that today, not with the sun. I'm sure some do. Not with fire, but we do that with sexual identity in general, right? I've been to Disney World. I've heard the Disney gospel. The magic is in you. All you have to do to really achieve your own magic and, the charmed life is express yourself authentically and truly. And then you'll be happy finally. You're what make this world special. Those are some of our modern idols, good things that we've created into ultimate things and bow down to. And they don't have a good telos, they're vanity.
Wow. Yeah, that is interesting that see, I never thought of it exactly like that, how that we can get on board with these other gods that are like us, but the pure, true, righteous God we push back on. So there's that greed to practice every kind of impurity also in us to some degree.
I mean, there's something about our modern moment that's also very ancient that says, let me rephrase that. The idols that we worship demand no sacrifices that we aren't already willing to give, desiring to give. There's something about me that I feel is repressed and I really want to express it. But, society tells me that I shouldn't be that. But if I can worship a God that demands that I sacrifice the opinion of society and just be who I truly am, that's great. That's not really a sacrifice. Christianity is the only religion I'm aware of that actually demands that you die. That you take all of your desires, all of your fleshly I wants, and put them on the altar and say, I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life that I now live, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Nothing else is so true. I mean, I don't know a better apologetic for the truth of Christianity than to say, what else could account for a bunch of people denying themselves and following Christ, other than they've had a real encounter with the real God? And that's the opposite of vanity. It's the opposite of darkness. It's light coming in your understanding, not darkness. It's being connected to the life of God instead of alienated.
Yes. Well, I feel that greed to practice every kind of impurity. I feel that greed in me, like objectively. Okay, if we think about this just for a second, if we think about what we're saying about God is true, and that the way our lives work best is actually best for us, best for others, best for all involved, for the way we're remembered potentially for a generation or two, is if you orient your life towards God, but it's actually not about you, but it's about God. That would seem like that just would be the way you'd want to go about things. But see, even as you're saying that, I'm thinking in myself, like, I push back on that a little bit, like even now I feel like, oh, come on, you can't take it all away from me, right? Like you gotta, like, I gotta live my own life here to some degree. Like there's something, I feel that thing inside of me that pulls towards wanting to live my life for myself the way I want to live it a little bit, even though I know it's like not the best. I know objectively that's not going to serve its highest purpose that way, but I feel that draw.
Yeah.
And that draw is basically it's basically sin, right? That's what that draw is.
I have a dear friend who's a fairly well-known country musician, so I won't name him and incriminate him. But he said, like everyone who knows me is immediately like, oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. He said to me the other day, because I offered him a beer, and he said, I couldn't drink until I met Jesus. And that stuck with me, because Christianity is laying everything you are and everything you love. It's not laying it on the altar, it's nailing it to a cross. And then the risen Christ, who leads a host of captives in his wake and gives gifts to men, gives back to you more than you can imagine. And, my dear friend's part of his story is he received from Christ the gift of being able to enjoy alcohol to the glory of God rather than to the glory of his own flesh, which would be vainglory, right? Yes. Futility. Yes. And that is, to be a Christian isn't to stop living and become an ascetic sort of monk who lives in a hermit cave. There have been Christians who do that. Not many of us today, right? To be a Christian is to say, not what I will, but what you will. Trusting that, like James says, every good and perfect gift comes from above, from the Father of lights, in whom there is no shadow or variation due to change. And we sing in the doxology every week at our church, praise God from whom all blessings flow, right? Psalm 84, I'll probably misquote it, says something like, I had rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. For, and here's the rationale, the Lord God is a sun and a shield. So he's all light, all vitality, all goodness, all warmth, and he's all protection. He goes before you. So for the Lord God is a sun and a shield. He gives grace, he gives gifts, and he gives glory. And he withholds no good thing from them that walk uprightly. Like, do we believe that? That the risen Jesus will hold back from you not one good thing if you believe him and follow him. I mean, I barely believe it.
Yeah, me too. And so like this way of looking at God is like the purest and truest, and it gives your life the highest purpose it could possibly have if what we're saying about God is true. And yet still, there's something about it that's harder to get to, and it's a lot easier to think in terms of you have your life is on its way, you direct your life, God can help you with your life. It'll go a little better, the downs won't be as down, the winds will be a little higher, you have a little bit more energy or whatever it is, God can help you along with your life. That is the easier way to think about this for some reason. And I guess sin would have to be part of that reason. I can't think of another reason. Like, it's an easier gospel. Would you not agree? There's something about that that's an easier gospel. But for some reason, it's the easier gospel, and it's not as great in its impact or its purpose somehow. But it's easier. That's a strange thing. Which I guess to like, if you wrote that out in an equation, you'd have to have sin in there. That'd be the only explanation for that, right?
Yeah, sin and its manifestation as idolatry. So think back to Acts 19 again, the riot at Ephesus from the silversmiths. Their life was ordered around an economy that relied on idolatry. So when the idol is threatened, they're not concerned about their faith. The silversmiths don't care who they worship. They worship a lot of gods. They'll take whatever comes. They're concerned about their money, because Artemis wasn't their god. Their money was their god. And so Paul threatened their wealth. There are few more dangerous things to threaten in this world. Now, today, threatening somebody's identity is right up there with wealth. Laying the claims of Jesus on sexuality and gender, laying that to heart, to not abstractly on a podcast, but to real people, like looking in the eye somebody who's struggled all their life and giving them the truth of the Bible on this matter feels like threatening their life's economy. And the response is a soul riot. That's what we do when our idols are threatened, right? If we're steering the car and we think we're in control, which is a sort of idolatry, and someone tries to take our hand off the wheel, we're going to grip the wheel real tightly because we do not want to lose control. But losing control is precisely the point with Christ. It's submission. It's saying, I give up. I can't order my reality anymore. I'm not good like you are. You are ultimate good. You withhold no good from those who walk uprightly with you. So, and you didn't withhold your son, and you didn't not go through the worst suffering ever. So if God can himself endure 3 hours of eternal agony on our behalf for our good, what can't we trust him with? What idols can't we smash? What things can't we let go of? That's Paul's logic in Romans 8 when he says, what does he say? If God, who didn't withhold his own son from us, if God did not withhold his own son from us, how would he then withhold any good? That's not an actual quotation, but that's the thrust of what Paul's getting at. He's arguing from the greater to the lesser. And that's at the very heart of the gospel, and it's the very heart of change, like repentance, growth in grace, growth in Christ, is trusting the goodness of God. I have a friend who's helping me see that right now, who's wrestled with that more deeply than I can imagine wrestling because of abuse in their past. And walking through the journey of coming to the conclusion God must be like an abuser to allow these things to happen. And getting through that all the way, because of the cross, to see if God is God, then he must be the fullest expression of everything that he is that's imaginable. There must be no one more loving than God, no one more merciful than God, no one more just than God, and therefore no one more generous and kind and good than God. And if that becomes your ordering principle of reality, then you can receive anything from his hand. Like Job says, though you slay me, yet I will still praise you. Man, can you imagine what it would be like to live life with that conviction fully settled into our hearts?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So then that would make sense why the view that we could take the sexuality thing as an example, that say the traditional Christian view of sexuality would be not just disagreed with, but it would be perceived as threatening and dangerous.
Yeah.
Because it's possible that in some cases it's speaking to an idol. Mm-hmm. And for that to change, it's perceived as or received as a threat, as danger, as an attack.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the best example of the heart of Christ to people who struggle letting go of idols isn't, now I'm not to say there's some better parts of Scripture than others, but if you just go to the prophets who say, woe to you because you go and lust after every Egyptian under every green oak or whatever, read Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah, and it's very kind of sexual in its talk of like betraying the God of the covenant. That is true, and that's there. But if you want to see the real heart of Christ most fully explained, because the fullest revelation of God is in Christ, right? That's where we get the clearest picture of who God is. If you want to see that, I think go to the Gospels and you see the rich young ruler who comes and says, "Good teacher, what must I do to be saved?" And Jesus says, "Why do you call me good? There is no one good but God alone." You know the commandments, right? And he lists out some of the 10 commandments. And the rich young ruler says, "Yeah, not only do I know them, I've kept them since I was a small kid." Like I can honestly say in my integrity before Jesus, I'm doing all right. And Jesus says, "Well, right on, man. I'm proud of you. Good job." So really, there's just one thing left. So go ahead and go sell all of your great many possessions and give it to the poor, because it's no use of you. And then follow me. And it says the rich young ruler went away sorrowful. We have no story of him coming back. He might have. I like to think he did, because one of the Gospels, don't remember which one of the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, says Jesus, looking at him, loved him. That's how Jesus feels about people who struggle to let go of idols, that have a grip on their heart. He doesn't look and shout at them and say, "You idolater, how dare you?" He looks at them and he loves them.
Yeah.
And then he lays his finger on the wound and says, "I can heal this. I know it's hurting you. I can help you. Are you willing? And he's really patient. And if our churches could do a little more of looking and loving and a little less woe to youing without compromising the truth of the Bible, I think we'd be doing a better job of presenting the real good news of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I feel that draw to wealth in my life. I think, if I were just to pick, like, I would be very wealthy. And also, that would just happen to be God's purpose for me. Like, and everything else could still be the same.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Do we know much about them giving themselves up to sensuality? How did that manifest itself then? Do we know much about that?
I don't know much about that in terms of Ephesus, primarily. We know that paganism in the first century in the Roman Empire was just sensual in general, which makes a lot of sense if your gods make a lot of reasonable demands of you that don't cost you a lot, but then they give you lots of the things that you already want. Then its natural expression is sensuality. I mean, most religions end in some kind of sensuality. That's a really big statement to make publicly on a recording. That's probably not true. I don't know that. I haven't researched that. However, what I mean is this. There are lots of religions that the whole point is like, guess how many virgins you're going to get in the new life, right? Or it's okay, you can be polygamous now. No worries. That's a pretty common thing. Now, Gnosticism or proto-Gnosticism, like what preceded the sort of full formation of the religion, seemed to have taken hold in Ephesus by this time. And Gnosticism taught the separation and almost antagonism between flesh and spirit. Like material things are bad, spiritual things are good. Therefore, worldly knowledge is only kind of partial and not that useful, but there's this higher plane of secret knowledge. And if that sounds like the Freemasons, that's not on accident. If there's this higher plane of secret knowledge that everyone has to attain to, and again, the natural result of that isn't that you become a total ascetic and do away with all material things. One might think that is the case, but the actual result tends to be sensualism. You say, well, if the flesh doesn't matter, if material stuff doesn't matter, then I can do whatever I want without consequence because I have higher knowledge, because I'm a spiritual being. Well, the resurrection of Jesus gives no room for duality or for Gnosticism. He is flesh and blood. He eats fish. He's got scars on his hands and feet, and he passes through walls and ascends to heaven. Like, God created both flesh and spirit. God is spirit, but God is over all of these things, and in Christ marries the divine nature and the human nature into one, which is just mind-boggling to think of. But it gives no room for us to say the flesh doesn't matter, materialism, this world, this stuff that you can touch, it doesn't matter. It matters a lot to Jesus. And 1 Corinthians says, I think 3 different times, Paul says in that letter, do you not know your body, that body, is a temple of the Holy Spirit? That leaves no room for sensuality. And Paul teases that out by saying, okay, thought experiment. You are a member of the body of Christ. Let's say you're a thumb, right? You're a thumb on Jesus's body. And you go into a prostitute. You have just united the body of Christ with a prostitute. Far be it from us to do that. So the body matters, flesh matters, material atoms and molecules matter to God. He has sanctified it all. He has consecrated it all by the resurrection of Christ. And so the opposite end, without the resurrection, sensuality is one normal way that we go. The other end of that the flip side of the same coin is a deep asceticism where we try to achieve sort of nirvana and an out-of-body kind of an emptiness and a nothingness. Both of them say the body doesn't matter. It's one coin with two faces. The resurrection is the only thing that actually dignifies the real humanness of humans and says, you are a body and you're a spirit. And both of those things will never be disentangled in the eyes of God. And you're going to be united to your body and spirit, for eternity before God. And it's an incredible, there's no other worldview, there's no other religion that explains reality and dignifies reality like Christianity. So anyway, I got away from the actual question. I just started talking about the resurrection. But
well, I think I guess it could depend on someone's perspective to a degree, but I also feel like objectively, like what we're saying, what traditional Christians believe about God is like the best case scenario. Mm-hmm. It just so happens that when you follow the Christian virtues, because we were talking about this last week with Chad and Mika Karger, humility, patience, love, selflessness, so on. It just so happens like when you do that, your life does actually work best.
Yeah.
And then when we think about like how we got here, why we're here, where we're going, I mean, it just seems to me like Christianity is like the best case scenario. And I wonder if like some people look in on it and think they got to be making some of that up because like that's either they're thinking they got to be making some of that up because that's too good to be true, or they're misreading the situation and thinking that it's like all, or they're buying into some of this other, bullshit that some people are adding to it and thinking, well, I don't want to. They see the legalism stuff that gets added to it and think, well, that's no good way to live your life either, which a lot of that we would totally agree with.
Yeah. I wonder if most people, another big statement, I have to be careful with hyperbole. It's a problem for me. Sometimes I wonder if we have followed our idols so far that we have become totally blind to those ways of thought. I don't know that people are thinking that deeply. The people in my experience, as a pastor and just as a Christian in general, that ponder the sort of things like, man, this person is living like Jesus is real. How is this possible? Like the people who go down that rabbit trail seem to be the people who've hit absolute rock bottom of the pit of despair. Just made myself think of The Princess Bride. You seen that? The Pit of Despair?
I don't think
you know
I
what
have.
I'm talking about? No? All right, it's fine. Viewers, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's worth watching. The people who've hit absolute rock bottom, nowhere to go, nowhere to turn, in the lowest of low, start YouTubing and Googling their big questions and find people wrestling with these things in places like this. Mm-hmm. And those people are the ones that often will come to me like, it's hard for me to believe that God's even real, let alone kind. Except because of my despair, I'm looking around and I'm seeing how these people are living. And I have no explanation for it. But the resurrection.
Yeah.
That's all I've got.
Yeah.
That's how it's designed to be.
Yep. All right, we're not going to spend this much time on the next chunk, but because we reference it, could you just go ahead and read then verses 25 to the end there, 32? Yeah.
I'm in the wrong chapter. Hold on. Ephesians 4:25. There it is. Therefore, which immediately signifies to us that, or signals to us that we're building a logical argument based on what preceded. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you.
I thought too it's interesting where he goes in verse 25. Therefore, having put away falsehood. And this is interesting what comes next. Let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor. Mm-hmm. Because it seems to me that currently truth is also under attack. Like, yes. There's no truth. Anything is true. Your truth is, my truth is, your truth is. It's like, that's like circular reasoning. It's like, I don't even.
Unless
like,
I don't like your truth, in which case your truth isn't truth.
That is true.
Right.
Yeah.
It starts to put a chink in the armor.
You're right. But you know, when you put those, sometimes you put a formula in Google Drive, in like Google Sheets or whatever, mm-hmm. and you mess the formula up and it like, it gives that like error button. It's totally. Like, no circular. You know, right. It says something about like circular formula or whatever. It's like, like that doesn't even work.
That's great.
That's how it feels like with some of this prevalent cultural understanding around mm-hmm. truth. It's like, it's like a misunderstanding of truth can't be whatever you want it to be. That's not truth.
Yes.
But that seems to be also prevalent. It's interesting that he goes there.
It is. Yeah, you're entirely right. And, you know, I mean, I have more questions about this passage than I have answers and insights. When he says, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for, here's the reason, we are members one of another. Does he mean by neighbor Christian, Gentile neighbors? So speak the truth within your Christian communities because we're members one of another in the same way that we're united to Christ and then united to each other? Or is he saying speak the truth with your your non-believing neighbors, like evangelism, because we're sort of the brotherhood of humanity? I mean, I don't actually see the brotherhood of humanity represented in the Bible much, if at all. Maybe like once that I can think of. So I tend toward the former interpretation, but it feels more muddy than clear to me.
Interesting.
Because I haven't dove into this and exegeted it properly.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll move on because there's a couple of things I want to ask you too. But sure. Like he even talks about robbing, like being a thief in here.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't have to look far to see that right now either.
I think it comes down to verse 32, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. There is a pivot point in the life of every person he's writing to that is cross-shaped, right? There is a God encounter, a Christ encounter, at which point you apprehend the mercy of God in Christ, as the Shorter Catechism puts it. You apprehend, you get your mind and your heart around the mercy of God in Christ, and nothing is ever the same. It's transformative. And again, that's 2 Corinthians 3:18. That's beholding the glory of the Lord with an unveiled face. It's looking at the cross. It's seeing the gospel. It's seeing what Jesus did for you, makes you into the kind of person that has a new self, so you can put off the old self. You can stop doing the things that you used to do that were futile and start doing things that echo into eternity, like speaking truth, not giving the devil a foothold or an opportunity, laboring honest work with your hands, that sort of thing. That's what Christianity, encountering Christ and converting to Christianity, doesn't create ivory tower academics or, blasé sort of vanilla Christians. It creates people who are hardworking, honest, full of integrity, loving, and truthful. It's great.
Yeah.
What could be better for our world, right?
Yes.
That's a lot better than looking to legislation to solve our problems.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And even that, like, it's easy to not have that be top of mind as you go about your day, like the old man and the new man, because there's not a lot of other things in this life that are quite like that.
That's right.
Like, we're used to incremental improvements over time. There's not a lot of things there that you have that sort of old man, new man.
That was very astute what you just said. I think it was Arian in like the 3rd or 4th century. Not Arian, Arius, the heretic. The guy Santa Claus punched, apparently.
What? What do you mean?
Who was it? Well, St. Nicholas. It's a legend that I just hope is true. St. Nicholas, who was an actual like bishop in Turkey somewhere, was at a council of the church and met Arius, this heretic, and slapped or punched him because of his heresy. So I hope that's true, because St. Nicholas is the one that we get Santa Claus from.
Yeah, that's funny.
So, anyway.
I might never think of Santa Claus quite the same again.
Right. I hope not. Arius, I believe it was, his issue was the deity of Christ, and he saw Christ as a created being. So he coined this little song, "There was a time when the Christ was not," or "There was a time when the Son was not." In other words, he's a created thing. He's not eternally begotten of the Father. He's temporally begotten of the Father. If you went far enough back, Jesus wouldn't exist. He's wrong. And the church refuted him very clearly in the early creeds. But he, if my memory serves, he spoke about Christ's humanity and deity as like a ladder. Like, we're down here on the rungs of the ladder. And then maybe there's angels. And then there's Jesus, and then there's God at the top of the ladder. So it's a matter of increment. It's a matter of scale. Like, how close are you on this thing? And biblical Christianity, like theology from the Bible, without any hesitation, basically says it's not a ladder. He is something other than you are. God is ontologically different than humanity, in the same way that a potter is ontologically different from the pot that he just formed on the wheel. That's how distinct and different we are, but even more so. And so Christ isn't just nearer to God than we are. He is fully this and fully this in a way that we can never be. And that's really important.
Yeah. Well, that's where some of our earthly examples fall short. Like I remember hearing someone say one time that, this person's son had died, and it was tragic, and the thinking was, that basically that battle had gotten lost, and that God would never have essentially, you get into the weeds here a little bit, but essentially, that God would never have orchestrated that outcome, because you would never do that as a dad to your son.
Right.
And I hear what he's saying. I heard what he was saying, but I think it's that analogy of like, what would I do with my sons or my sons and daughters? There are limits to that, because life and death is in God's hands.
Yes.
I believe that. Like, it's one area of hope for me, So I don't know that you can quite extrapolate. Yeah, I would never kill any of my kids, Right, I would never design something so that would happen. That would never be an outcome. I would fight for everything, and if one of them did die, it would be, because all of my fighting to not let that happen came up a little short.
That's right.
And that could happen. A whole bunch of different ways, but it's different with God, isn't it? Like, it's
a
different thing.
Genesis 22. God comes to Abraham. All right, final test. I want you to offer up your son, burnt sacrifice, Mount Moriah. Let's go. You can read the Bible very thoroughly from there on out and not find anything so morally reprehensible until you get to the cross. Because God doesn't ask Abraham to do something that he's not willing to do himself. And in Hebrews 11, we get a glimpse in behind the curtain with Abraham. He's a thinking theologian. He's not a feeling guy. He's a thinker. And so Hebrews 11 says that he reckoned, he considered, he sat down with a pen and paper and like worked it out. Okay, God made me a promise. First of all, Acts 7 or 9, Stephen in his sermon specifically says the God of glory appeared to Abraham while he was in Mesopotamia. So God's call to Abraham wasn't some disembodied voice going, Abraham, follow me. You know, the God of glory appeared visibly to Abraham in such a way that Abraham said, I will reorient my whole world around you. Imagine getting a glimpse of something so glorious that you're like, nothing I have, no status, no wealth, no security, no safety, no comfort, no loved ones are worth keeping at the exclusion of you. That's how God showed up to Abraham. So then they walk together for decades, and God makes a promise to Abraham, which is, through your son, with Sarah, I will bless the whole world. I will save the world. So that's premise one, like God says, I will bless the world through your son, who will become a multitude of nations and kings. Premise two is God says, kill your son. Abraham goes, okay, God, if God made the promise, God's glorious and good. The only possible conclusion I can come to is that God will raise him from the dead and bring him back and then fulfill his promise. So I'm willing. And he did. And he probably shed more tears than we can imagine on the 3-day journey up to that hill. But he said to his servants, he took servants with him, 2 servants. He said at the bottom of the hill, he's got 2 servants and his son Isaac. And he turns to the servants and says, you guys wait here. The boy and I are going to go up, and then we are going to come back to you. He already believed God was going to restore him to life.
Okay.
He thought he was going to have to, you know, the pictures are all Abraham with a knife raised up like this. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like that. It was a slitting of the throat. It was a sacrificial lamb, a sacrificial knife. It was a very personal, slow, intimate. It was awful, the most horrible thing you can imagine. And he goes, I'm going to do that because the God of glory told me to. And then God is going to restore him to me because he's good and true and doesn't betray his promises. And it's going to be better that way somehow. And he couldn't have foreseen the glorious third option of the ram in the thicket. Mm-hmm. But with God called him to that, knowing that God himself was willing to actually go through with the sacrifice. Like in that story, we are not, who are we in that story? If we're placing ourselves, we're Isaac. We're the people who should die. Jesus is the ram who comes and is killed in our place. There is no ram for Jesus.
Yeah.
When the Father's Son is going up to the cross, bearing the wood on his back like Isaac bore the wood up the mountain, there is no ram in the thicket. He's the ram. He has to die. But God already knows he's going to bring him back to life. And that just turns all of our everything on its end. Mm-hmm. God can't be an abuser if all those things are true. God can't be a mean God. And if Jesus, like Isaac, he didn't argue, he didn't protect. If he's old enough to carry the wood up the mountain, he's old enough to fight off his centenarian father and run the other way.
Good point.
Right? He was willing. He trusted his Father. Jesus was completely willing to go through with it. So if it was against his will, God's an abuser. If Jesus and the Father had a covenantal agreement before eternity where Jesus said, I'm going to do this, I'm willing, let's do this, then God is the ultimate good. Mm-hmm. I can't find another conclusion.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to wrap your head around the concept of God. Like I think every so often about the time David Filson was on this podcast a couple years ago, and he was explaining to me the concept of the simplicity of God, which is that God is not the composite of parts. He just is. And I used to think of God as like this God the Father, and then God the Son. God the Son's Jesus Christ. God the Father is like another person type being. There's like a center point of emission, and it's so strong that there's no part that's not less powerful than closer to the source, but it still emits out of some place. But it doesn't seem to be that that's the way it is. It's almost like the truth is I almost like hesitate to use words to describe it, because it's just, it's like this divine, alive algorithm in some sorts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
simplicity is one of my favorite doctrines to think about, because I believe it. God is simple. He is not made up of composite parts. Perfect definition, right? The God who is simple, he is one, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Deuteronomy 6. Became flesh. Therefore, God, the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, who is God, is now made up of molecules. So the non-composite God, one of his three persons is now composite and non-composite. So then he dies, and then he's raised back to life, and then ascends to heaven. And after his ascension, we are his body. So now the composite, non-composite God is made up compositely of all of us composite people. And he is still one. So now you get to John 17, the high priestly prayer. And Jesus says, Father, I pray that they may be one, like you and I are one. Like, whoa. Whoa. That's the kind of unity we're called to. That's just, it blows my mind. It's my favorite doctrine, not because I get it and then can like preach a sermon on it. It's because it blows my mind and then makes me sit back and just scratch my head for a couple hours.
The doctrine of the simplicity of God.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, theology should make us just experience awe.
Yes.
More than anything else.
Yes.
Right?
That's what I experienced. That is, yes. Now, but would you agree that Jesus is still composite?
Well, he's human.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's still one.
Yes.
That's as much as I can say.
Okay.
All I can do is the classic Calvinist thing of say, this seems true and this seems true. And so I'm going to hold them both and let there be tension.
Yes.
Like I still pray and say the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God there. You still echo that. Mm-hmm. God is simple. He is not made up of lots of things, so he is not reducible to smaller things. Christ is not reducible. So you technically are reducible to a certain massive number of molecules, right? Christ is not reducible to a number of Christians.
Yes.
So he's not composite in that sense. And he's not reducible to a number of molecules because he's also God. So I don't know. That's where my brain fizzles out and I just worship.
So do you think that Jesus is still human then somewhere?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that he eternally united human nature to divine nature in the incarnation.
Okay.
And that would be following like Gregory of Nazianzus and kind of the early church fathers who really worked on the doctrine of the Trinity and kind of the hypostatic union and how these two natures are combined. And I can't remember what creed it is. One of the early Christian creeds says that the divine and human nature are combined in Christ with neither like confusion nor compromise. He is both truly human and truly fully God. And it's just this mystery that you go, I'm just going to have to hold this, letting it be what it is without explaining it down and reducing it.
You mentioned Tony Shepard earlier. Tony Shepard has 6 kids, and I think one of his oldest kids, when they moved back to Nashville last year, walked into the first night at student ministry and walked up to Vince, and he's probably 12 or 14 years old, and said to Vince, the student ministry, Hey, I know what the hypostatic union is. I bet you don't, or something like that. Vince said it was hilarious.
That's amazing.
I don't even know what that is. What is the hypostatic union?
Don't ask me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's Tony Shepard because apparently he taught his kids.
I've written papers on it, but it's one of those things where it's like you don't talk about it every day, so you kind of put it out of your mind.
Yeah.
It essentially is what I just said, that it's the divine nature and the human nature of Christ coming together without mix and compromise in the person of Jesus. So I remember writing a paper in seminary at Knox about the mechanics of the hypostatic union on the cross in the atonement, and the importance that if the natures of God are, if divine and human nature rather are commingled and then therefore compromised in some way, like he's kind of like 80% and 80% 20 or 50-50 or something like that, then he could not accomplish atonement for humanity, and he could not be a mediator for humans and God. God has to die, and all humans have to die, and only a non-composite, hypostatic unionified, Son of God can both pay for the sins of his people and reconcile them to the Father.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay, 3 more things I wanted to ask about.
Yeah.
Narrative in Scripture. Can we get some top-line thoughts or some clip notes on that?
That's one.
No way we're going to. What's that?
What are the other 2?
Oh, narrative in Scripture, the impassability of God, and the aseity of God. Let's touch on all 3 yet before I get you out of here.
Excuse me. Hold on. Sorry. I hit the mic and then coughed. It's like a 2 strikes. Yeah. 1 more and I'm out. Well, let me say
narrative of Scripture.
Yeah.
Top line thoughts.
The Bible, so a good novel doesn't start with, "Hi, I'm the narrator. I wrote this book," and it's all made up, right? You're the reader. I'm the narrator. We all know these are the rules. You pretend that this is real. You get emotionally invested, etc. That's not how books start. They just start with, chapter 1, and then they get you into the story. And the goal of a good story is to get you to participate in that story, to see yourself in that story, and to be shaped by that story. Now, whether that's a true story or a not true story, which might be unhelpful categories, right? Like good stories in some sense are true. Yes. And Tolkien talks a lot about this in like On Fairy Stories, and Tolkien and Lewis were big on kind of myth as not being false, but as sort of representing truth in a different way. The Bible is a really good story. From start to finish, there's been a lot of ink spilled on how the Bible is one narrative. There's a cohesive plot line and a story to this whole thing, made up of a whole bunch of other narratives and other genres. It's a story that encompasses poetry and wisdom literature and letters and like weeping and lamentations and all of these other things, genealogies, but it's a story, and in that story are a whole bunch of really rich but really ancient and foreign narratives. So if God had began the Bible with a prologue, which is like a first word, right, to say, "Dear reader, I am God. I wrote this through the mouths of lots of humans and through the pens of lots of humans, but I inspired it all so you can trust it, but you're going to have to go along for the ride." Like that would have been one way, but he didn't do that. It's just in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And if you're just encountering this book, Genesis, or this book, the Bible, it's a compilation of 66 books, and you're encountering them for the first time, you have to go along for the ride. And you're reading it in order, and you're asking a lot of really big questions. Like, okay, God created everything. Cool. What's he like? Is he good? Is he kind? Is he just? Is he merciful? If you're in, a ancient Near Eastern pagan context, where you grew up reading Babylonian myths or Ugaritic myths or Egyptian myths about creation, these stories, you'll read Genesis 1 and go, I'm assuming God is bloodthirsty, lusty, and greedy, and selfish. those are your assumptions based on your stories, because stories form people. That's what they're meant to do. They're not just meant to delight. They're meant to delight to the purpose of forming somebody. So Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that Genesis 1, the creation narrative, flows like a lot of ancient creation narratives do. And there's a lot of similar, the parting of the waters and the rising up of land out of the water and the sort of day structure. All these things are very similar to lots of other creation stories.
From other religions?
From other religions, yeah. So Egyptian stories, Babylonian, Mesopotamian stories, all these. But there's some really key differences. So in Enuma Elish, which is do I remember? Is it Syrian? Ugaritic? Doesn't matter. It's another ancient Near Eastern creation story. Enuma Elish. There's several gods, and they decide that they are hungry. So they need to create a world full of people who can cultivate cattle and sheep and whatever and feed them. So to do that, one god starts arguing with another god and slits that god's throat and spills his blood into the mud and forms man out of the dirt and the blood. So creation in the Enuma Elish is out of greed and jealousy and rivalry and selfishness and all of that. And it shares a whole common vocabulary and thematic structure with Genesis, and probably predates its writing. So it's old. And then you get Genesis. In the beginning, God, just the one, created heavens and the earth. Why? He wanted to. How? By his word, not by blood of other gods. There's no rivalry. And then you discover there's no need. He doesn't need us to do anything for him. So therefore, creation in the Bible's narrative is out of the overflow of God's joy and pleasure and goodness, not out of his need and greed. That's what stories are meant to do to people, is teach, is it brings you into the story to go, oh, I'm one of those. I'm one of those creatures. I'm a creation. And then, therefore, I relate to this God. But now I know what this God is like, that he's not this way. He's that way. And so over time, the narratives of the Bible fill in the picture of what God is like. So we talked about Genesis 22 earlier. When if you're reading the Bible for the first time, you get to Genesis 22, you're supposed to be shocked. You're supposed to be appalled that God would ask Abraham to sacrifice his son. That's the point of the story. And if you are, good. You're letting the story do what stories are supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Coming on the tail end of a cold still. So stories are formative and participatory. And so that's just really foundational to reading the Bible, is we need to understand a lot of it is told in narrative. And the way that we let narrative work is we read it, then we think about it. Then we read it again, and we think about it. But we don't read it and concoct systematic theology from it as we read the first time. You know, we should come to conclusions about who God is based on the story over time. Sorry. Anyway, so stories are formative, and that's really crucial. Jesus knew that. That's why he almost exclusively told stories in his ministry. What's the kingdom of God like? Well, he could have written a textbook. He didn't write any books, which is interesting. He was a storyteller. He just said, well, it's like a mustard seed. It grew into a big tree. It's like a banquet. You know, sorry, I'm losing my voice.
Oh, you're fine. Cough it out, bro. We basically make no edits on this podcast, but if you just have to go have a good, solid cough, like, just cough that out.
The pipe either makes it way better or way worse. Find out.
It always makes it better. I had this working theory a few years ago when I was smoking more cigars that the cigar helped with the allergies, but I don't know that was really the case.
Tell ourselves lots.
Yeah. There's no doubt about that.
All right, so let's see if I can do this.
You're back.
And we're back. Okay. There's
oh no! Now we have mosquitoes in here because I opened that door. We're trying to blow some cold air in here.
Oh yeah, it's all right. So Hebrew narrative is a very specific kind of narrative too. There's narrative in the New Testament, right? Like Luke. Luke is a really good storyteller. The book of Acts is an incredible story, start to finish. The Gospels are remarkable stories. Now, their genre is bios, or they're like biographies.
The Gospels?
The Gospels are. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're in a genre that was already known to that world and that time, which is interesting that the Lord contextualizes his word in ways that we can receive it and go, oh, I know what we're talking about here. But story is universal. There is no culture without stories. Stories are culture forming and they're culture shaping. I mean, you want to know, we talk about gospel doctrine, gospel culture at Emmanuel and at Christ Church as well. The thing that is below, so gospel doctrine precedes gospel culture, right? What we believe about Jesus shapes the way we live that belief out. And what we believe about Jesus comes first through story. And then we categorize it into systems and go, okay, God, if these stories are true, God must be simple in the doctrine of simplicity terms. He must, be impassible, as we'll come to later if there's time, if my voice holds out. He must be all of these things, right? So that's a systematized theology, but it arises out of story first. That's the kind of the primary vehicle of this. So part of my passion is looking at the often neglected portions of the Bible, the misunderstood, the weird, the foreign stories in the Old Testament, and letting them wash over us like a good story should, and letting it work on us, letting stories, let them mess with us, right? Like, get appalled, get angry a little bit, get frustrated with the God who would allow this to happen, those sorts of things. It's like, good, you're alive. You have a heartbeat. Wonderful. Now keep going, finish the story. My son, William, he's 10. He's a sensitive boy. He's a good boy. He's kind-hearted and generous and lots of wonderful things, but he's also sensitive. And when we're watching a movie that hits the climax, or the height of the plot tension, and it's just sad, he's like, I'm done. Turn it off. Like, no. Watch it. Keep your eyes open. Put toothpicks in your eyelids. Keep your eyes glued to the screen and finish the story, because every good story has to do that. And every good story uses appalling things and desperate things and sad things to work on us and in us and form us and shape us and delight us. And the Bible does that too.
To your point on that, the one of the things I was thinking about recently is how straightforward particularly in the Old Testament, how raw some of those stories were. We were reading the story of Samson and Delilah a couple nights ago because we're trying to we struck on a little system that might work because Colby was in on that podcast with Chad and Mika last week. So Lincoln is just great at making food. I mean, he's got natural talent, bro. I'm telling you right now. When he makes dinner, we eat. He's naturally talented. He's 12 years old, and he's like a little mini chef. Anyhow, we're thinking we're going to have Lincoln pick whatever he wants to make every Monday night for dinner, awesome. And he'll pick whatever he wants. He made burgers and fries, and the fries were like, it was straight potatoes, salt, and coconut oil. And, dude, I would actually eat those fries over McDonald's fries, which is saying a lot because, McDonald's fries,
they got it nailed down to a science.
They have it nailed down to a science. If you have fresh, warm McDonald's fries, I still think they're hard to beat. Anyhow, this is where I was going with that is Monday nights he's going to pick the menu, make dinner, and then we're going to try to read some scripture and talk about it a little bit because that's just where we're at. Like if we can start with once a week, that's going to be a win for us. And So we were reading Samson and Delilah, and the story where we started starts off with Samson going down to sleep with a prostitute, and like they're all snickering, and you're like, well, what am I going to do? Like, this is what the scripture is saying, you know, so we can talk about it. But it's like so straightforward and almost like on the nose. So is that part of what you're saying with like some of these stories they're just raw.
Yeah. And if you keep going in the Bible story and you get to Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith heroes, right? And they praise Samson for his great faith. You should go, hold on. I read Judges. Samson's a ding-dong. That's in the Hebrew originally. Like, he's an absolute ding-dong. He has, like, how does he deserve to be? That's exactly right. Good. You're thinking.
Okay.
You're letting the story do its work on you.
Okay.
And if you read the story of Samson and Delilah, having read Hebrews maybe, and go, well, Samson's a hero of the faith. So you read Samson and Delilah, you read the whole story of Judges, and you conclude that everything Samson did was great, and you kind of whitewash it, you're missing it.
Okay.
We're supposed to read about Judah and Tamar and go, I can't believe one of the patriarchs of our faith did that. Or, you know, we're supposed to read about the slaughter of Reuben and his brother of Shechem, where they tricked everyone into getting circumcised, and then while they're kind of wobbly at the knees, they go in and just slaughter the town. We're supposed to be appalled. Read, you know, Abraham and Sarai and Hagar, Abram, Sarai, and Hagar. Like, these things should be morally reprehensible to us. Exactly. It's the point. You've got to let the stories work on you. And there's a lot of ways that Hebrew narrative, which it's just so dear to my heart. Now, I'm not a Hebrew linguist. I'm not an expert in Hebrew, but Hebrew narrative is worth kind of some people devoting a lifetime to studying, because there are tools and techniques that Hebrew narrative picks up and uses to accomplish that end of the story working on you that are remarkable. So, I mean, the Lord chose to speak through particular languages and particular times on purpose. For instance, Koine Greek, the New Testament's written in Koine. It could have been written in classical Greek, which would have been much more flowery, much more formal, much more precise. But he chose the common language because at just that precise moment in history, the whole sort of known civilized world was using Koine as the language of the marketplace. So by writing the New Testament in Koine Greek, everyone could read it, roughly. You know, everyone literate in the known world could access it. So he's very particular about why and when he chooses a language. And he chose Hebrew, one of many ancient Near Eastern languages, to speak to us, to breathe through his spirit, his word, for the duration of the world. So Hebrew's got some really fascinating things that make it unique. When Hebrew narrative is telling a story, the first thing to notice is it's remarkably sparse. There is no extra detail. And I can't stress that enough. There is not one wasted word, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many much smarter Hebrew scholars than me.
So all of the New Testament is in Hebrew?
New Testment's Greek.
I'm sorry, I meant to say Old Testament.
Old Testament's Hebrew, except for a portion of Daniel, which is written in Aramaic. And that's starting in Daniel 4 and doesn't last very long. I don't remember how many, maybe a chapter or 3. Don't know why. Never studied Aramaic, but they're related, so they're pretty close. Mm-hmm. But Hebrew is. Have you ever read any Ernest Hemingway?
No.
I have read portions of his novels, and the sort of thing of like, I felt like people think I'm smart, so I should read Hemingway. You know, I'm like, if you want to be manly, like, no one's more manly than Ernest Hemingway. But I couldn't make it through. However, what's been striking about his style of prose is that he is as sparse as Hebrew narrative. So I think there was an excerpt. I came across this on a blog somewhere. It was striking. I think it was the book For Whom the Bell Tolls. Someone receives news that their son has died or something like that. And the narrative is like, you know, Joe Schmo heard that his son died. And he looked up and said, blah, blah, blah. And it gives no insight to what he feels. It doesn't say, and his face fell in dismay and his tears started pouring down his cheek. It doesn't say that kind of stuff. It just says, well, and then he did this, and then he did this, and then he did this. Now think back to Genesis 22 as an example. God says, take Isaac, your only son, whom you love, and offer him up as a burnt sacrifice. And the next thing it says is, and Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went off. How does Abraham feel? We don't know, which is precisely the genius of it. It's more emotive. It's more powerful as a story because it does not give us the details. We must then empathize with the characters. It's inviting us through Hebrew's sparseness to enter into the story and go, what must that have felt like? Because if it had said Abraham was sad, it would have cheapened it, So that's a feature of Hebrew narrative that runs throughout and is really important. Hebrew narrative also, part of its sparseness is it doesn't give extra detail on not just emotion, but on anything else. So color. What was the color of Abraham's robe? Who cares, right? Doesn't matter. What was the color of the stew that Esau ate from Jacob? It was red. Why do we know that it was red? Why does the Bible say? So in Hebrew, almost very literally, Esau comes to Jacob, who's making stew, and Esau says, give me some of that red. It's almost caveman-like in its just kind of urgency. He's making some sort of red lentil soup, and the color red is emphasized. Give me some red. Why? Well, nothing's wasted in Hebrew narrative. So later, we'll find out Esau is associated with, because of that story and because he seemed to maybe have red hair and be very hairy all over, etc., he's renamed to Edom, which is the Hebrew word for red, which is also the same letters as the name Adam, who's named because of the earth, Adamah, which is kind of red clay. That's the idea. So all of a sudden, this whole motif erupts out of that one scene in Genesis where he says, give me some stew. And it has to do with the color red. And it doesn't stop until the book of Obadiah. And it might continue into the New Testament. So everything that Hebrew narrative lays down is vital to understand, or not vital, but important and helpful to understanding the rest of the story. And that's something that's just almost stands alone in the world's literature as impressive and artful and lovely as its own. If I had notes, I could probably do a lot, go into a lot more of that.
So you're talking about the one thing that would also be true is there is a grand narrative to the whole of Scripture, right? But you're saying you're kind of zooming in on the many narratives within Scripture and how when you're reading Scripture, you shouldn't just kind of read across the top of it, but you should be looking for the narrative within the mini narrative within the greater narrative. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, so often in Bible reading plans, like where do you stop reading? You start in Genesis. Numbers. Like I'm tired of counting how many people the Israelites set out with from this camp, Menachem or whatever. You're like, I'm done. Well, we get tired of the narrative because it feels rote, boring, useless, whatever. But that's because we're disattuned. That's not a word. We're not tuned to the way that narrative works, and so we can't read what's really happening. So I'm preaching Genesis 24 this week. It's a good example. Abraham sends his servant up to Haran to find a wife for Isaac, his son. And so the servant goes through this whole commissioning from Abraham and then this internal dialogue with the Lord, right? Like, Lord, send out, like, I'm going to ask women at a well who should be the wife. Like, I'm going to ask them to give me a drink. And if it's the one that you want, let her say these things, etc. Then just a few verses later, he repeats that entire huge chunk of dialogue almost verbatim back to Rebekah and Laban. And to the Western ear, we're like, dude, we just read this. Like, this is a really long chapter. You don't have to say it again, right? Because we're trained in modern Western rhetoric that repetition is bad. So if I were to say again that we're trained in modern Western rhetoric that repetition is bad, you'd be like, I know, you just said that, dude, right? Exactly. But in Hebrew, it's emphatic. So if I'm saying it twice, listen, like open your ears. And then you start to notice, well, maybe he switched some words around the second time. And it's in the variation in the repetition that we start to see the real color of the story come out. So it's those sorts of things where Hebrew narrative is this beautiful thing that we tend to skip over. We skim read Genesis and Exodus and Deuteronomy and Joshua and Judges because we're like, yeah, I know the story. But we're missing some incredible, beautiful emphases that lead to Christ that are just, they're really important.
And this would be one of the portals through which you could spend eternity mining for the goods, right? Like, there's a lot more going on than even people who really study it fully know yet. Oh, yeah. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I want to also ask about the impassibility of God. Is that correct? The impassibility?
Yeah.
What is the impassibility of God, and why does that matter?
Yeah, so this is going back to, maybe it'll tie in. The impassibility of God is a systematic theological category. It's a box that we have created to help us understand something of God's character, like the doctrine of the simplicity of God. So it's not a word that we have in the Bible, but it's a lot of theologians attempt to summarize teachings that we glean from the Bible. So the Westminster Confession says that what is authoritative for faith and life is everything written in Scripture and everything that we can deduce from Scripture by good and necessary consequence. Right? So if you can make a logical syllogism from two premises in Scripture, then the result, the conclusion of that logic, is also authoritative. So the impassibility of God it comes from the word passion, and it basically means that God has no passions. And then all modern listeners go, what does that mean, right? So if we think passion, what we're talking about is the idea of suffering, ultimately. Suffering and, to a lesser extent, emotion. So here's how that doctrine has been abused in recent years, is people saying God has no emotion. He's apathetic. He's a cold, heartless deity, just letting the world do its thing. He's not moved by what's going on. Well, that is contrary to the Bible's teaching. The Bible just constantly is insisting that God not only sees the oppression and suffering of the people here, but he mourns with them. And not only does he mourn with them, he enters into their suffering. And not only does he do that, he suffers in their place so that they can be redeemed and receive the joy of the Lord. So that warped view of the doctrine is messed up. God is not apathetic. If God is God, he must be, as we said earlier, the most extreme end of everything that he is. He must be the most loving thing, the most kind thing, the most merciful, the most just, etc. And I think that's really important. So impassibility, what it really means is two big conclusions for me. One, he is not ruled by emotion. So I am, right? I feel an emotion real strong and I can't help. But I mean, how many of us, maybe in our younger days, God willing, put holes in drywall with our fists because we were ruled by an emotion? Got in an argument with somebody and got really upset and punched a wall, right? I've poorly patched a lot of drywall in my days because of that. And that's a sign, that's a demonstration of us being absolutely ruled by our emotion. God does not lose control to what he feels. He's in total mastery of himself. If one of the fruit of the Spirit is self-control, self-mastery, those come from God, who has those things in their kind of ultimate expression. Mm-hmm. He is the most self-controlled, and in some sense doesn't need self-control. Anyway, So he's not ruled by emotion. You see that in the Gospels when Jesus goes to the temple and turns over the tables. Because what does he do? What must logically he have done before he turned over the tables? Well, it says he used a whip to drive people out. Where did he get the whip? It's possible that Jesus went to the temple, saw what was going on, and this is something my friend Chad used to say a lot. Maybe he went down to the marketplace and found the leather vendor and said, "Hey, give me 9 strands of leather about yay long." And then he measured out the coins and then walked back up the hill to the temple, slowly braiding a whip from this leather. There's something measured and controlled and mastered about that.
I see.
He didn't just light off. Jesus didn't walk into the temple and lose it.
Uh-huh.
He knew exactly what he was doing, and he was in absolute perfect control. Show me a man like that. I mean, you show me a man like that, I'll follow him. Mm-hmm. and to its ultimate expression, I'll follow him anywhere, right? Because that kind of self-mastery and passion commingled. What could be better than that? That's the impassibility of God. He is not mastered by his emotions. When he sees the oppression of the wicked, he doesn't jump to their rescue at the exclusion of their future good. How often do we do that? Like, we see an immediate problem and our empathy overwhelms us. And we go, I'm going to give you $20 now. Instead of thinking about, how can I give them a whole life later? Right? Jesus doesn't find himself in that quandary. God is not ruled by emotion like that, for good or for ill. He's above that. The other aspect of the impassibility of God is that he is, to be passible is to suffer. And that comes from kind of the Old English usage of the word, which means to like receive something from somebody. In other words, to suffer means that you are subject to the control of something else. So for God to be able to suffer in that way means, in some sense, he is dependent on external stimulus or stimuli. What we do in the world affects God's godness. And that's not true, right? He's bigger than us. Like one of the Psalms says, God looks far down on the heavens and the earth. He doesn't just look down. He's not like so like us that he can just look around. And he's not just slightly above us that he can look down. He's so different ontologically from who we are. He so doesn't need us that he looks far down on the heavens and the earth. So nothing we do can impact how he feels in the morning, right? Like if we go to bed after arguing with our wives, God forbid, I'm sure you never argue with your wife, just like I never argue with mine. You go to bed, you feel kind of icky. You wake up, you feel kind of icky. You know, time didn't magically heal the thing because we are not impassible. And what other people do and say in this world affects how we move through the world. And that is not true of God. We can't arm wrestle him into being something different or feeling a different way or anything like that. And praise God that we have a God like that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. That's good news.
It's really good news.
Yep.
He's not bending to the whims of this world.
Yep.
Like the rest of us are. Now, on the flip side, is he apathetic then? Is he cold? And I go back to Genesis 22. How must the Father have felt offering up his son? You know? When Jesus screamed, shrieked from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Quoting Psalm 22. Was the Father unmoved? Did he just go, don't worry about it, resurrection later, I already know it's coming? Jesus knew it was coming too and felt the full depths of emotion. Emotion isn't a human idea, it's God. It comes from God. All life, truth, goodness, beauty, all of that comes from God. So in some sense, and I pause and I think about the Scottish theologian Donald MacLeod, who said, when he was talking about this, he said, we're at the edges of revelation right now. in some sense, the Father himself must have suffered when the Son was separated from his life on the cross. When Jesus was cast into that darkness, was the Father unfeeling, or was he suffering as well? So, I don't know. I'm entering into a debate that is raging with people a lot smarter than I am, with a lot more degrees than Fahrenheit, which I can't compete with. But when I read the Bible, it does not allow for a cold, unfeeling God, nor does it allow for a God made in our image who is at the whim of his emotions.
Yeah.
It has to be a God who enters into our suffering and redeems it from inside out by suffering more than we do on our behalf.
And how about the aseity of God? What is that?
Yeah. Aseity. So that comes from a lot of places, but it comes especially from John. Can't remember. I think it's John 1. The Father, who is life in and of himself, has granted that the Son might also have life in himself and grant that to those whom he will. Something like that. We could find the exact quote and be more accurate and specific. Essentially, the doctrine, so what aseity means is in and of himselfness.
Okay.
Right? So everything, you and I and you and the tree outside and the dog and everything is derivative. We came from somewhere, and our life is dependent on something else to survive. So the tree without the sun will not live. There is no life for the tree. You and I, without food and drink and water and whatever, will die. There's no life without that. God has life in and of himself, so he is dependent on nothing, which is why he is the I am. He can just exist prior to anything else existing and is. And he's the only one who's like that, and that's called his aseity. That's a Latin word. Let me find this other link here. Where did it go? Here it is, John 5. I thought it was 1, it's 5. Jesus says in verse 25 of chapter 5, "Truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him, he, the Father, has given him, the Son, authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment." So the judgment of Christ has to do with giving life to some and death to others. And he can give life because he has life in and of himself, and therefore can freely distribute it. And he has life in and of himself because the Father has granted the Son to have life in and of himself. So now we're bending at the edges of human rationality. And this is this gets into the eternal begottenness of the Son, that this didn't happen in his human lifetime. There wasn't, Tuesday, the 3rd of Kislev, God said to the Son, "Now I grant that you have life." The Son, from eternity past, has always been granted of the Father that he might be, that he might exist without depending on anything for his existence. And part of that privilege is the right to give life to those who aren't independent.
Yes.
Is that making any sense?
Yes. No, that is. Does Jesus have that right, or does God the Father have that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They both have the right, okay. I would argue. The Son has been given the privilege. So the task of the Son is to walk through a graveyard of this world And, you've seen Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or read it, right? Chronicles of Narnia. The end, where Aslan goes through the witch's palace and breathes on the stone statues, and they come to life. That's this. Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about. The footsteps of the Messiah through this world is like through a tomb, like a graveyard. And he gets to go, I'm going to breathe on you, I'm going to breathe on you, and everyone on whom I breathe, you will live. Because he doesn't derive his life from elsewhere.
Yeah.
He is life.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Literally, if life was one thing that you could put your finger on, you'd be touching Jesus. So where else could we go? That's why Peter says, when he says a hard thing, like, you have to eat my body and drink my blood if you want to live. And everyone leaves him, and he looks at Peter and goes, are you going to leave too? And he says, where else would I go? You have the words of life, because life is in him and from him and for him, as Paul would say later. So I love that doctrine. One, because it boggles my mind and takes me to worship because I can't get my head around it. And two, because it comforts me that when I take all of my need and the dead corners of my heart to Jesus, I am going to the source of life. And he is qualified and capable by decree of the Father to distribute life freely, like candy on Halloween.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're not dependent on anything, you couldn't be taken down either. Right? Would that be another logical conclusion you could get from that?
Absolutely.
Well, John, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for carving time out of your busy schedule.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here tonight. You and Becca are you guys are two special people. You're a real gift to Nashville.
Thank you.
And I think you've been a gift to people far beyond Nashville. You're a gift to those that you're around. I hope you know that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
This was last summer, the one before, at one of the staff retreats or whatever. We were out on the boat, Marianne and I, and you and Becca, and just, there wasn't even much time, but we were talking with you guys, and then we were talking about it afterwards, and it's like the life of Christ is really evident in you and Becca. You're a formidable couple that are, just spreading the life of God to those around you, man. So you keep doing that.
Thank you.
But I want you to know you're a real gift to Nashville. So be encouraged in your work, because we've been around each other for a few years at Emmanuel, and then with this church plant, and so I kind of feel like I have somewhat of a front row seat to what you guys are doing at Christ Church, and it just looks so super promising. I can see God doing a lot of work through you guys in the coming years.
I hope so.
Yeah, you keep at it.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to say on here?
Love you, man.
Okay, love you too. Yeah. Thank you very much for being on.
You.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll close with that. Bye, everybody.
Try to catch me howling at the moon.